It's obviously important for us to understand the people who might be president, and we can understand them through their words, through their actions, but also through their personalities. And one way to do that is with the Myers-Briggs. And to that end, we're very lucky to be joined on the program by Associate Professor of Psychology at Maryville College, Dr. Aqualus Gordon. Welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
Good to have you back as always. Now I know your expertise is in the Myers-Briggs, and we've had a lot of fun over the years classifying the people in our own lives.
Sure.
But now I want to jump into some who might be running for president. We're going to be starting off on today's show talking about some of the Republicans most likely to run for president, including, of course, Donald Trump. But before we jump into him, for people who might not be familiar with the Myers-Briggs, what is it and why is it a useful way to look at personality?
Sure, the Myers-Briggs has been around for quite some time now. It's a personality test, to put it quite shortly. It's actually based on the work of Carl Jung, who's one of those old time psychologists who was kind of kicking around with Freud. So it's got some real deep basis, but one of the things that Catherine Meyer and Isabel Myers and Catherine Briggs did was sort of put together this kind of deep psychological work into these letters that most people, or types that most people can just grab and sort of understand a bit about themselves.
And so a couple of weeks ago on the show, I was on with Jessica Burbank, and we figured out that we were both what are called INTJs. So the Myers-Briggs produces these 4-letter codes of different sorts of personalities. So based on your best work, your gut, Donald Trump, what letters would you apply to him? And then we can dive into what they actually mean.
Sure, Myers-Briggs. Donald Trump gets typed often as an ESTP, so an extrovert, a sensor, a thinker, and a perceiver.
And thinker, huh?
Sure, and one of the things that Myers and Briggs actually say is that thinkers aren't necessarily the smartest people in the room, or necessarily smarter than feelers say, because what you think is based on what you know. And if you know things that aren't true and you think those are the facts, well, you're gonna act in accordance to those facts, even though those facts aren't really truthful. And well, I think you've given some good examples of people who might be using their thinking style in that way.
Okay, so tell me about ESTJ, you said?
STP.
P, okay, so he's extroverted, sensing, thinking, and the P is which?
Perceiving, perceptive.
Perceiving. Okay, so rather than judging, which is, so each of these can be one of 2 letters. So the last is either P or J, correct? So right. I'm a J, I'm judgy. I would think that he would be judgy as well, but he's not. Why do you think that he's a P instead of a J?
Sure, the difference between those things I think often kind of gets misinterpreted. When we say judging, that is a good word for it, but I think when we say judging, people think judgy, like you've said, where judgment just means that you've made a decision, that you've come to some conclusion. And so judgers are types that see the world and they come to some conclusion about it. This is what needs to happen. This is what has to be done, or this is what this person is asking for, right? So they're always coming to these sorts of conclusions, where perceivers are more comfortable just perceiving, just kind of learning, or maybe at some point understanding what something is, but not necessarily making any sort of, they don't really have any motivation as to what they necessarily have to do about that thing. So Donald Trump as a perceiver is a person who knows things, right? I know things people are saying, right? But he never necessarily, even in his presidential style or even when he's given speeches, he rarely goes so far as to say what needs to be done about that, except we'll elect him. So that is very sort of perceiving in that way. And in Donald Trump's case in particular, having that sensing, extroverted sensing type of perception, well, he's gonna be really tapped into the way things sort of are in a very literal sense, how they look, how they feel, how they smell, right? These things that you often see him doing, where he's talking about how beautiful something is, or how successful someone is, or how nice a business that he owns is, right? He's very tapped into the way things are, the way that he sees them at least, but doesn't necessarily say, and we should about X, Y, or Z.
Okay, and so interestingly, each one of these letter combinations has a like label applied to it. and some not necessarily super specific understanding of what they're like. So the ESTP is weirdly enough for Donald Trump, the entrepreneur. And so you've already gotten into a little bit about how that set of letters organizes itself, how they see the world, which is obviously important for their politics. The fact that he doesn't come to a lot of judgments and just sorts of feels might imply why he was so rarely driven to really accomplish much as a president. But what else would you say is generally true about entrepreneurs that might help us get an idea of what he would be like were he to become president again?
Sure, and I'm not here to diagnose anybody, but I can sort of talk about personality in a way that's kind of functional, in a way that's less functional. And Donald Trump has got sort of an imbalance, we would usually say, in his typing. So I don't want folks to watch this and think that, if you have that personality type, that you're gonna have a lot or very, very same traits as Donald Trump. Because one of the things that can happen to that type in particular is that when they get stressed, they will start to become paranoid in the truest sense of the word. That means that they start to have these ideas that aren't necessarily true, right? So they start to see things that aren't necessarily there. And obviously, the election loss for Donald Trump is a really good example of that, where he's saying these things that people are against him or people are cheating. And a lot of that is probably really coming out of this sort of paranoid place that ESTPs and in fact ESFPs can get into when they're feeling really stressed. They start to try to grasp at seeing things in a different way or seeing things in a way that isn't really true, when in general, this type is really good at seeing the way things are truthfully.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad that you make the distinction that simply because there are some characteristics that might be applied to this group, it doesn't mean that everyone with that class is gonna be the exact same way or that they will make the same decisions. This isn't reading the stars or something like that. It's a way of organizing thoughts around people with decades of work that have gone into it. So I appreciate that.
I will say real quick, one thing that often gets kind of misconstrued about the Myers-Briggs, and in fact why some people have some criticism of it, is they see it and they read it and they think about it like some sort of horoscope, and it really isn't predicting anything about a person. What the Myers-Briggs is best at is understanding why people are making certain decisions, almost in an after the fact sort of way, because it really just organizes sort of the filters through which people see their world and the filters through which they kind of make decisions in that world. So the thinking types are going to be less tuned into people and more tuned into the facts that they have, and they're going to make decisions out of that. And so we can sort of trace into the typing, understanding how Donald Trump in this case is making decisions, more so than actually knowing what he's going to do in the future or having some kind of prophetic understanding of him.
Sure. Yeah, it's psychology, it's not physics.
That's right.
Humans are in some ways a lot more complicated than the natural world.
That's right.
Particularly people like Donald Trump. So we got Donald Trump. He's almost definitely going to run. It seems like the most likely other Republican right now is possibly Ron DeSantis, who has been really raising his profile recently. At this point, how would you classify him in terms of his letters?
I had to look this up, to be honest. He is somebody that I don't really watch that much. You see him, at a press conference now and then, but that's not necessarily the best way to get a typing on somebody. And so I looked through a few things and I found the one that I feel like kind of fits him the most, which is actually, it's one letter off from Donald Trump's, but it's actually a pretty different typing. So Ron DeSantis, I believe, is an ESTJ. So that last letter being the judging instead of the perceiving. And this type is very different than the ESTP. This type they're a type that's really tuned into the way that they believe things should be. And then they're really also tapped into trying to put those things into place. And so you can imagine with somebody like Ron DeSantis, who, again, if he really holds conservative values, that's the way things should be, and how do I get them into place, right? Mm-hmm. What ESTJs don't do very much is sort of think ahead. They don't sort of think about the way things could be or what would happen if we just put this thing in place, right? It just needs to get back to sort of normal for them. They just want things back to normal and they're gonna work to get them into this place, but they're not very visionary. And in fact, this type, when they get stressed, tends to catastrophize. So whereas the sort of ESTP will kind of get paranoid and drill down into this one idea that they think is true, and they're seeing all this evidence that isn't there, the ESTJ will start to say, well, if we don't get these things right, this could happen, and this could happen, and this could happen, and all of these things are bad. But I know what it looks like when it's normal, when it's usual. So let's just get it back to normal. Let's just get it back to usual, right? And so this type is going to be sort of very on the tracks. It's one of the more common types, and in that way, the personality in terms of interacting with it is probably a little bit boring in this case. There are not really any bells and whistles. So if this is a true typing of Ron DeSantis, again, I really only know him from press conferences. I would say that he's probably really that guy. He's probably less of a politician than Donald Trump, or even say somebody like Barack Obama or Joe Biden. He probably is this sort of guy who believes this is how things are supposed to be, and let's get it that way.
Okay. Interestingly, the ESTJ is the executive.
Sure.
Which, maybe they could be in that in a business sense or something like that, but it could also be the executive branch, perhaps, for Ron DeSantis.
Sure, the J types like to do, right? They're deciders. They like to make stuff happen, and so any EJ is really going to be a person who's going to step up and want to do things and be ahead of the pack in some ways.
Sure, interesting. So 3 out of the 4 were similar for Ron DeSantis versus Donald Trump. We should also bear in mind that one of the things that complicates this coding is that not everybody is equally strong an E or an I. They could be, as we've had in many of our talks, like you can suspect that someone is one way versus another. You can be like strongly or not so much.
Very much so. Let me say real quick that one thing that I'm doing is that there is this sort of deep psychological basis of what we call functions and function dynamics underlying the Myers-Briggs. And so I'm sort of shorthanding it. But yeah, the way that those things show up and which function or which letter in some cases is stronger is also going to say a bit about one type of the same type versus another type of the same type, right? That there are still a lot of variables even within that 1 4-letter code.
Exactly. Yeah, and you can only go with the information that's presented to you. It's a lot easier perhaps to code a friend of yours who you've seen in a lot of different states. Some of these people, it's a public image that they're putting forward, and so you can't be necessarily too sure. But that said, someone who maybe we've seen more of, I'm gonna do we're gonna have one more candidate potentially, and it's a wild card. It's been rumored, and that would be Tucker Carlson. He's a very high profile right winger. If you had to guess, what would you say his coding is?
So I also looked him up, but for him, when I found it, I was like, oh, of course. Tucker Carlson is, I believe, an ENTP. So this type really likes to bullshit, and so as opposed to, I'm sorry, I forgot. I can't curse.
No, that's okay.
So as opposed to say somebody like Ron DeSantis, who may really just be this guy, may really just be this person who has these conservative values and is trying to put them in place, to the best of his ability. A person like Tucker Carlson is a person who really likes to mess around. He really likes to kind of get people's goat. He really likes to explore possibilities and see where they lead, and oftentimes won't really care if kind of exploring this possibility or playing this game or kind of goofing off in this way would offend somebody or would hurt their feelings. If you contrasted that, for instance, with the feeling type of that kind of same degree, the ENFP, they also like to mess around. They also like to kind of prod at people, but they're also really sympathetic to, okay, that would be going too far, or this is going to hurt their feelings. And so they'll mess around, but they'll kind of keep it within bounds as far as people are concerned. The ENTP not having that feeling type being one of their more dominant functions isn't going to have that concern. And so they can really mess around in ways that would be funny to them and maybe funny to other people or maybe be just interesting to them, but they're not necessarily going to be very considerate of how that's affecting someone, at least in the moment. They may come back and go, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that, but we don't necessarily even see that from Tucker Carlson, from what I understand.
Okay, well, I've looked it up and they're the debater, so that sort of makes sense in this case. I think you've described them to me as the most troll of the classifications.
I think so. They really just like to have fun. They really like to just see what happens. What will happen if I lob this, this bomb in the room? What will happen if I say this thing that I know is going to really irritate this person? Or what will happen if I show up, dressed ridiculous and everybody's supposed to be in a suit? Like they just like to mess around.
Bow tie, maybe?
Yeah, sure, exactly. They just like to sort of mess around in that way. And again, not really having that sense. So again, compared to somebody like Ron DeSantis, I really wonder if Tucker Carlson really believes what he's saying, if he believes it to the degree that he's saying it, or if it is really just for kind of kicks and giggles, so to speak. If he's really just trying to see what will happen, if he can get these people riled up, if he can get these people mad or on his side.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that he believes much of what he says. But it fits in that he would just say it because it's it's to his interests, I guess, to do it. And interestingly, there's not that many letters difference between him and Donald Trump. Donald Trump definitely likes trolling people, likes getting people's goat, as you said. For the debater though, for the ENTP, like I would imagine that person running a high profile campaign would be entertaining. It might not be super productive or good for the country necessarily, but it could make for an entertaining presidential run.
Half of the people would call it entertaining, and I think half of the people would call it highly offensive, right? It sort of depends on, if he's going after you or if he's making fun of you or if you're the butt of his joke, right? That the people that he's doing that against, and right, in a political kind of system the way that we have, he's got a whole other team to pick on, and his team can be sort of free and clear of that. They're gonna find that really funny, they're gonna find that hilarious, and the people that are kind of the butt of his jokes are gonna find it highly offensive, most likely. And I think that's how most people read his program, at least. So I imagine his political run might go similarly.
Yeah, I think. Look, I found all three of your evaluations there to be pretty plausible, but I think this one is the slam dunk.
Sure,
I think that's definitely what he is. Interestingly, we didn't have any introverts there. I would love to have you back on in the future to talk about other candidates, including we need to dive into the Democratic side. Maybe we'll find some introverts on there, but on the Republican side so far, not so much.
I'll give you a quick, what do you guys say? Sort of teaser. I imagine probably Bernie Sanders is an introvert. I think Barack Obama is an introvert. Last thing I'll say is that most people, you're an introvert. Most people, when they have this sort of public face, if they're introverts, they almost adopt a secondary type, a type that they find easy to slip into and just kind of be this person when they have to be on, and then when they're off, they can just go back to being their introverted self. And so a lot of politicians who are introverts, it might be hard to tell up front, because when they're on, they're gonna use that extroverted side, and we don't necessarily get to see them kind of private.
Okay. Very interesting. I don't want to reveal all of my secrets here, but later on we'll talk about what my persona is, sure. my superhero persona. Anyway, that was, I think that's really interesting. I think that there is a lot that we can learn there, and I look forward to breaking down more politicians in the future. But Dr. Aqualus Gordon, thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.